Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to SAP Now. My name is Faisal Hanif. I'm part of the EMEA South Center of Excellence for SAP Cloud Platform. And today's session, I'm going to be talking to you about how do we enable the remote-based virtual enterprise. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the enabling the remote-based virtual enterprise. So in the last couple of weeks, with the lockdown in place, it's caused a number of disruptions and dislocations both for employer and employee. The employer hasn't been able to get the same level of effectiveness and productivity as they would expect. And then from an employee perspective, they're having to work around their friends and families and children at home, but still trying to maintain as much of their efficiencies and productivities as they would expect. But without that team environment, without the ability to access some of the enterprise applications that may also have been locked down. So you can consider some businesses may still be using desktops. Those desktops are only accessible to networks that are inside the office. And so this causes a huge problems for many of the businesses and many of the employers. So if we look at how long this lockdown is going to take place, and also some of the policies like social distancing, one has to look at history and decide that history has proven that whenever there's a shock that takes place, any policy that comes from that shock tends to stay with us indefinitely. So if you look at the last shock that took place, like 9/11, we're still living through the consequences of going to the airport, taking out our laptops, taking out any liquids before entering into the gates or entering into the aircraft. Even when we go to any kind of buildings, we have to give both our names, take our pictures, verify who we are, who we're meeting, before we're allowed into the building itself. So there's no doubt that some of the policies in place today, like social distancing, will continue going into 2021, 2022, and it'll become a new normal. So both employer and employee will have to work around some of these policies. And already there was a survey done a couple of weeks ago that Gulf Talent, by Gulf Talent, that 35% of Gulf-based businesses have already made a decision that some of their contracts will now become work from home contracts, or their employees will be asked to work in a remote environment, dislocating themselves from teams. And the employees themselves will have to start looking at ways on how they will work going forward and how effective they'll be. Of the 54% who haven't yet planned, they will have to either adapt to the new normal or they will die and they will be replaced by new companies and new entrepreneurs. So what we found was, given our own examples as SAP employees throughout the world and countries started to move away and work from home, there were a couple of considerations that we had to put in place. First of which is, how do we make information simple and easy to consume? This is something that affects everybody, because when you're in a team, it's very easy to ask a particular question to an expert who is in your team or around the office. But when you're without, it's much harder to ask that question and get a reply immediately. Your team members or certain people of the teams are working within their own time frame. They're working around their families, their friends, and their children. And although they could be getting all of their work done, they may not be able to respond to your questions as quickly enough. So it's really important that any information that comes out of enterprise applications or enterprise systems is as simple and easy to consume as it would be if you were in the office with your team members working together as a collective and effective team. The second one is that how do we make enterprise apps that were deployed before the COVID-19 virus being able to access them remotely and both effectively. And it also means that most businesses won't have the appetite to do a re-implementation. They also won't have the appetite to make any development changes in the back end. Both would add cost, and it would also involve collective teams working together in an office environment, and something that they can't do in a particular lockdown. So how do we make lightweight applications access enterprise applications that are both simple and easy to consume. And the last thing is, as we see this social distancing policy continue into to 2021 and beyond, and there's no doubt of that this may or may not continue. If we look at what's happening in South Korea and China, their policy dictates that in an office environment, no more than 30% of the employees cannot work in the same office. And so if that rule comes into the Gulf regions, we could also see that same state. So as the employees transition their tasks that they transition from task workers into automation workers, we also have to be able to offload those tasks onto somebody else or onto another system. So those tasks need to be completed. So how do we make sure that our suppliers are paid for the service that they've delivered, or we get paid for the service that we've delivered to the customers? And all of those processes have to be completed. And then the last thing is, how do we scale quickly with causing minimal amount of disruptions going forward, but at the same time being as productive and as effective as possible? So let's have a look at some of these examples. First of which is, how do we make information as simple and easy to consume in a consumable way on an app that's accessible by all? Well, one of the apps that is accessible by all in a consumer device is a messaging app, whether it's WhatsApp, WeChat, or Apple Messenger. So this is a good way and a good example of where we can use transactional chat boxes to connect back to enterprise applications. And they can either be very informative, or they can be transactional based. So they're kicking off a particular workflow, or they're activating a couple of scenarios, or they're creating an action, right? One of the actions could be, I'm sending my timesheets into the system. Many people on the shop floor, blue collar workers, white collar workers, may not have access to the system, and their current process is that they send their timesheets in a handwritten note to the supervisor, and it's the supervisor's role and job to upload it into a system somewhere. We could bypass that by using something like a chat box, and the employee themselves can enter the time that they spent in a particular process or a particular program, such as delivering or assisting or servicing certain parts of the business or their customers or their suppliers, etc., etc. Another part is for managers and information workers. We can actually connect a chat box into their BI layer, business intelligence layer, and they can ask a series of questions that they would while being in the office, such as, is there a like-for-like report that has this SKU for time periods 2018 and 2019, as an example. The chat boxes are contextually aware, so they understand that you're asking for a report that's in your BI repository. You're asking for periods 2018 and 2019, which are time periods set as filters, and you're looking for a report that already exists that some other user has run. And they're able to then give you that information. So it saves you both time, and it also saves you the need to actually rebuild that report. And that could actually work in the another direction, whereas somebody who needs to ask about how many holidays they've got left, so it can connect to a HR system, so they know exactly how many days they've worked and how many days they've got left. So when they ask, how many days have I got left, the system knows that it's asking about their holiday period, not the number of days left in the month, right? So it's contextually aware. Because it's using an NLP language, it can have a discussion with individuals within the time period that it suits the individual. So being available 24/7. It's multi-channels accessible. So any system or any app that has a messaging or a web services capability, so whether it's a portal or whether it's an app like WeChat or WhatsApp, they can access enterprise data and enterprise applications with a touch of a couple of keystrokes. And obviously it's multilingual, so it can work in your diverse companies workforce, and so the employee can be comfortable asking and speaking whatever language dialect that they speak. So this is a good example which not only makes information easy to consume, but it also allows certain applications that requires network access or a specific access to be accessible within a simple consumable app like a messaging service. And we're already seeing some trends around using chat boxes, not only for B2C informative chat boxes, but into a B2B environment where it kicks off certain workflows and chat boxes, workflows and events based on the interactions that the employee or employer or partner, business partner has had. Another example is part of making enterprise apps ready for remote working and also transitioning from task workers to information workers is how do we automate some of the repetitive tasks, some certain tasks that need to be done just so that the company can function as it should do, such as accounts payable, accounts receivable. How do we make sure that we get paid for the services that we've delivered? Or how do we make sure that we pay the supplier the correct amount of money against the invoice, against what was delivered to either it's a service or a product. And so we already saw a initial trend line taking place around intelligent RPAs or robot processing automation. And I think after COVID-19, where there is a need to make sure these tasks are managed and correctly deployed, I think there's going to be an acceleration into using more of IRPA going forward. So why is it important? It's important because you're able to use some of the integration and capabilities of your existing system. So that means there's minimal amount of disruption. There is very little to no updates that need to take place in the back end because we're using technologies such as screen scraping or API, which may already exist. And we're using that technology that's already available and actioned to be able to create robots based on those. SAP's IRPA versus some of the more general purpose IRPAs, the differentiators are that yes, we're integrated to SAP applications, but we also bring about some out-of-the-box automation. So these are pre-built bots, and they come in two flavors. One, which is the bot, the executable bot in its own right, and then also the script, so everything that leads up to how the data is prepared and how it's transformed before the bot executes and populates the individual screens or uses the APIs. Now that could be a good starting point that helps you accelerate your bot deployment, and it cuts down your implementation phase from weeks down to a couple of days on individual bots. And this helps you with making sure even if your teams cannot work collectively together, even if you have a reduction in some of the task workers, you can still make sure certain tasks that need to be done are done, and they can be done remotely or they can be done with people doing them and running these bots directly. So if we look at the details of IRPA, it comes in two forms. One, which is a standard form, an attended form, and an unattended form. Attended form or attended mode allows a user to run the bots as if they were in front of the screen, and they can follow the actions of the bot as it's basically going through. An unattended mode is when the bot is running in the background in a server somewhere, and so they can in parallel run a number of transactions and make a number of updates. The capabilities are designed for end users to be able to create their own scripts and write their own scripts and create their own bots. So there's very minimal amount of development or programming language or know-how that's required. What's more important is having a understanding of what the process is and where the information and what type of information needs to be entered into the system. So again, this is a good example of taking tasks that were previously managed and run by employees, whether they were in finance, whether they were in data management or in CRM, that need to take place just so your business can function. These now can be offloaded or outsourced into a bot, and bots can be run in parallel to making sure certain processes are complete before the next step basically encounters. In terms of automation out of the box. Out of the box bots, we have a number of comprehensive content that could be used as a starting point. Finance, operational leads such as record to report. We have a comprehensive bot. They're all available, free to use as part of the software. Moving on to the third scenario, which is, again, going back to how do we make some of the systems accessible and easy to consume. If you look at one aspect of the business, which is workflow, it effectively acts like a bloodline into the whole of the heart of the business. As one process finishes and a second one continue, that workflow has to be approved, it has to be commented, or it has to be rejected for them to be able to move to the second process. Workflow typically sits in somebody's inbox, and it has to be actioned before some other subsequent process can continue. And what we're delivering is out of the box workflow in what we call mobile cards. So these are inintrusive applications that sit on top of a consumer device, and that can be actioned by the employee around whatever time frame that they've got. So they can work around their friends, their families, or the people that they're looking after without having to log into their inbox or having to go into a special work list in a GUI environment or in application environment to kick off these workflows going forward. Why is this beneficial? It's just accelerates the ability to making sure that you still have those checks and balances and those workflows that are required for compliance reasons, and they are still available to the right individual to manage and maintain the effectiveness of the business, but they're readily available and easily available into a consumer-based environment. Now we've got integration out of the box for SuccessFactors, Ariba, Concur, and this allows you to be able to manage and run all of your workflows and any events that needs to be actioned by an employee or a manager very quickly and easily consumable on a mobile device. I mentioned mobile device, and obviously whichever remote technologies that you end up using, mobile is going to be one of them. So SAP has a very comprehensive SAP Cloud Platform mobile services capability. So not only do we deliver out of the box applications that are mobile enabled, but we also deliver the ability to create employee apps altogether. So you have the ability to create persona-based apps. You can either create them by yourself, or you can use something that the partner has delivered. So they may have a pre-configured, templated approach to delivering employee apps using SAP's Cloud Platform mobile services. And that enables you to take certain things that are in a GUI environment and make them available on an iPad or a mobile device. So a particular persona, whether he is a HR individual or a procurement officer or a finance controller, can access all of the screens and all of the data that he needs in a single user-friendly interface. We have two forms of development kits, one designed for iOS development and the other one designed for Android. So the look and feel mirrors the development of any of the apps that you would find in an iOS kit or an Android kit. So they are intuitive, they're user-friendly, but they connect directly back to your enterprise applications. And again, this is a good way and a good starting point of making sure that you have all of the apps and capabilities available as more of your employees work from home. So I talked about the applications. They're both native apps, so they deliver the full functionality and capability of what you would expect from an enterprise application, but they're using the native development capabilities of iOS, such as the Swift-based SDK kit from your iOS or your Android device. The design language is entirely up to you. You can use a native design language that's coming from SAP, such as Fiori, or you can build custom apps depending on the workflow and the processes that you would like to initiate. So from an SAP perspective, if you already are using Fiori, you can enable those Fiori apps in a mobile device, and those mobile devices can then access the same look and feel based on the Fiori designed language on a much smaller screen. And all of the security, the authentication, understanding who the worker is, who the person is logging in, is maintained based on the credentials that you've set. So this is an example of using Fiori apps within a framework of a iOS development, and they have all of the data and processes available to them to be able to be as effective and as productive for their particular role.
Hi, so this concludes the session for today. We saw some great examples of how companies are using technology to bridge the gap between the dislocated individual and the enterprise. I hope to see you again. My name is Faisal Hanif. If there's anything that you found interesting in today's webinar, feel free to contact anyone from SAP and we'll happy to go through a more deeper dive with you. Thank you.